Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show from wonderful, wonderful Copenhagen, the capital city of Denmark. Over the last 1,000 years, this fiercely independent kingdom has won and lost two empires. In the Middle Ages, they conquered England. In the early modern period, Danish territory encompassed Sweden, Norway, the Faroe Islands, Iceland and Greenland. Now the Danes are engaged in more peaceful pursuits as a small nation in the very heart of Europe.
Now time for our final programme on Denmark, that fascinating independent-minded country. Hans Hermansen is the CEO of the English-speaking newspaper, the Copenhagen Post. A former Director of Communications of the Danish Red Cross, Hans says he's been fighting for human rights for years.
Hans Hermansen, you're Chief Executive Officer of the Copenhagen Post. A very unusual paper in the sense it publishes in English, really to the expatriate population of Denmark. How did that come about?
Well, it started 20 years ago when some two English students came to Denmark to study, and they found out there was nothing in English here. So they said they will release an English newspaper. And they did that for about 1 year, spent all their own money, spent their parents' money, and they were bankrupt. And then they need to consult a lawyer to make them bankrupt. This lawyer, he had been the CEO of one of the biggest papers in Copenhagen for 10 years. So he thought this was a brilliant idea. And he bought the paper for 1 kroner and hired them again as directors. And then he ran it until 2 years ago when I, together with some colleagues, took over. And the idea is Danish news in English, because it's very important when people live in Denmark. They're here 3-4 years maybe. They don't have a chance to learn Danish that short time, and they know they go to other places. And then they can see what's going on in Denmark. And what's more important is they take this newspaper home, where they have a family who's very isolated. And they can see where is a kindergarten, where is a school, a good school, what's going on, is there something, a theater, something in English. So it's a whole family who can use this paper and get their informations. And we can feel where other newspapers is going down. Some also English newspaper, they don't even give a printed edition anymore. We're going up because there are coming more and more international people to Denmark.
So you're an English language newspaper, but
yes,
very much a Danish paper,
yeah,
in terms of your political and social commentary on the state of Denmark. Yeah. So how would you assess the state of Denmark at the present moment? Still on the right lines, a very prosperous society, a highly contented society according to surveys. Is there anything in the undergrowth that Danes should be worried about?
If you see what should we be worried about, you can take the whole world has changed. As I told you, I've been working for the Red Cross, and a few months after I started in the Red Cross in the 90s, the wall fell in Germany. And then we think, now we have peace on earth. And everybody was happy, but I have never seen the world more full of wars and terrible things than it had been for the last 2-3 years.
From the outside, Denmark is an ideal society. It has high standard of living, high standard of public services, but are there signs that Danes are increasingly worried about high taxation, or for that matter, immigration into Denmark?
The Danes know what they get for the tax. The only people who try not to pay their tax is the very rich people, because they move away from Denmark. But the normal Dane, they pay their tax and they know they get value for money. About the immigration, I think all countries in Europe is afraid of immigration. We cannot feed 10 million more people in Denmark. We are only 5 to 6 million. Danes are very worried about it, and those who don't say they're worried, they're lying. And when they're gone to vote, in 6 months we have an election in Denmark. You'll see people who go in and they vote for Dansk Folkeparti because they are afraid of the immigration. You are afraid of something you don't know. We want to help, but we don't want to spoil our own country. And people who is willing and want to be here and want to work and want to pay tax here, they're very welcome.
How will that tension resolve itself, Hans? If it's impossible to control immigration within a European Union context, is there likely to be a rising number of people in Denmark who say, well, if we can't solve these problems within the European Union, perhaps like Britain, we should move outside the European Union?
That will not happen, because what I feel when I talk to people, they know that we are a very small country. Without all the trading deals, without EU, without trading with the whole world, we don't have a chance. We have to export our goods. We have to export a lot to England, and we hope that will continue. And that's the way a small country like this. We are very well educated. That means we're good in design, we're good in engineering, we're good in green energy. We have so many things to sell to the rest of the world. And if we build borders, we can't do that. And that would be a catastrophe for Denmark.
And so Denmark joined the European community as it was then in 1973, the same day as Britain joined.
Yeah.
Denmark voted against the Maastricht Treaty in a referendum, and it had to be asked again.
Yeah.
It has shared many of the Eurosceptic tendencies that we've seen in Britain. But from your perspective, there is no chance of Denmark following Britain out of the exit door.
I don't think so, and I think it was a big mistake that England, they let people vote about it. But it's so complicated that
David Cameron probably thinks the same thing.
Yeah. Because I mean, how much do we know? How much can we be involved? It's just you hear something, they come and take our work. I'm against, and you don't really see all the profit. If you make what's good and what's bad, there's more good than bad. So I can't see Denmark can ever leave. We see it. We have, I think 2 times we have been voting if we should keep the krona or get into the euro. And people, they don't vote about the euro because they know when they're traveling it's much easier with euro. But they want a statement. Are we against? It's more funny to be against than be with.
Your paper carried a very interesting supplement recently on the success of UN City in Copenhagen.
Yeah.
Do you think that a small country has advantages in attracting international agencies in a way that perhaps it would be difficult for Washington or Moscow, for that matter, to have agencies where people would think there might be some political influence, whereas a small country can host a United Nations agency without fear of any bias?
We're a small country, but we think big. And we have been working for human rights for 200 years. The first was written in 48. So our voices is heard in that area. And UNICEF we have had here for many, many years, delivering, their stock delivering for whole the world. And we do a good job. So that's one of the reasons. I think they know that they can trust us and we're good at the job we do. I think that's the reason.
A fascinating history. The nation of Denmark has had 2 empires.
Yeah.
You took over England once.
Yeah.
You had Sweden, Norway.
1061.
Canute the Great got there before the Normans.
Yeah.
But is a comfortable country within the context of the European continent now? It sees its place well defined within Europe? Or do you think Denmark has other ambitions for the future?
No, I think we are fine where we are and will develop still. In Denmark we have to do engineering, design, and if we have to have the factories, most of them will be out of Denmark.
So you're saying that the state of Denmark competes not as a superpower, but in terms of brain power?
Yeah, maybe that's what I'm saying.
Hans, thank you so much for being on the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Alan Milius is a Copenhagen city councillor and an expert on the history of the city. He's had over 28 books published on the subject. Alex met up with him to hear more about local politics.
So Professor Alan Milius, local historian, 12 years a councilman, and Danish beer expert. So the first question for you is, what is the best Danish beer?
The one you like.
Now, Alan, you take people round this great city and you show them a bit of the real living history of Copenhagen. What do you tell them about the state of Denmark? What do you tell them about how Danish society is evolving and moving forward? From the outside, things are really good. highly prosperous society, socially cohesive, and a society with great awareness of environmental issues. Is that the reality, or are there some troubling undercurrents?
We are working on it, but as you probably know, in all over the world, we have the same problem that people is moving from the countryside to the big cities. We are getting 1,000 new inhabitants in Copenhagen every month. So the city grows very strongly, and that gives us a lot of problems, but up till now we've been able to cope with them. So we are trying to keep up the good work and the social standard, and as I always say, Copenhagen is the red island in the green country because it has been socialistic since 1917, so it has been a long history for being a red city.
Now, looking over the cityscape of Copenhagen here, we see a great deal which tells us a bit about Denmark. Firstly, hardly any high-rise buildings, so this is one of the few great cities of the world which you actually see a cityscape like this. We see the great district heating plants, we see the renewable energy, the wind energy offshore Copenhagen. Does that tell us a lot about that cityscape? Does that tell us a lot about Copenhagen and Denmark?
We're trying to keep our history in mind. So therefore we have a ruler inside the old rampage, which was running right down here. Inside there, no building over 5 stories. So therefore we try to keep the old city. As you can see in the outskirts, they are moving up. But inside the city, we are still trying to keep the old city as authentic as possible to give the world an impression of how it was to be Dane and probably how it will be in the future when you look over the rest of the city.
Now, Denmark, famously in international comparisons, has a high level of personal taxation and an extremely high level of delivery of public services. Some people say that that tension is going to come to the fore in Danish politics and Danish society. What's your analysis of that, Alan?
The problem is that liberalism in this most primitive form is anybody is closest to himself. And therefore they want to keep everything for themselves. But history have learned us that if you pay for it advance by taxations, then when you need it, it's there, even though you don't have any money. So therefore, historically seen, it has been a long fight from the 1920s up to now to build up a system where you're sure if you're getting sick, if you want to education or things like that, the money are there, you can go to it, you don't have to pay extra to get any of those services that a society normally should provide.
Now, Danish society or Danish politics seems to be moving to the right. We've seen the emergence of the Danish People's Party. We've seen the Social Democrats tacking right to try and make sure there's no breakthrough by the People's Party into government. Would that be your analysis? There is a trend to the right from this traditionally social democratic consensus?
Well, the Social Democrats never had majority in Denmark. They only got about half of the votes. So therefore, Denmark had never been quite socialistic. But there is a tendency to that people are thinking more in liberal terms and might some fear for the foreigners being brought there and might some fear for or grief that I wanted for myself and tomorrow never comes. So that's perhaps a new way of lifestyle that's getting to Denmark. Before we were all thinking about trying to think ahead what could happen tomorrow. So therefore a new kind of what you will call individual greed is a part of the new world.
Stay with us, because coming up after the break, more from Alan Milius, plus a look at Copenhagen's groundbreaking UN city. We'll see you then.
Denmark as a country joined the European community on the very same day that Britain joined back in 1973. At various times on various subjects, Denmark has been pretty Eurosceptical in its attitudes, rejected the Maastricht Treaty first time round in a referendum, has never joined the euro, it keeps the krona. Is there any chance whatsoever in your analysis of Denmark following Britain out of the exit door?
Probably not. I voted against the EU and I've done it up till today. I'm nothing against a common market, but I don't like the political structure on top of it. That is my objection to it. But I don't see at the moment that there's any movement. And I can see that if you look at the polls, the EU is not so unpopular. That is still a majority for being in the EU, so there's not a movement trying to get out.
So the Brexiteers in Britain who say, look, there's a queue of countries that are going to follow Britain out the exit door, they're going to be disappointed.
I think so, because if you look, and when I have looked at the result of the British referendum, all the people under 50 voted for yes, and it was the older people who voted that they wanted to go out, which made a lot of bitter young people in Britain. But in Denmark, there's not that gap between older and younger people. There's a brighter understanding. I think that, well, we are a part of Europe. We once were one of the big powers in Europe. Now we are a very small country, thanks to stupid governments and stupid wars. For instance, Britain burned down most of the city in 1807.
Twice in a few years, the British naval excursion into Copenhagen during the Napoleon. I think that was revenge for Canute the Great taking over England in the 11th century.
The British never forget.
Well, you must lay that one down to the English.
Yeah, I will.
Scotland is not part of Canute's empire.
I know, but much nicer people.
But Denmark is quite interesting because I've made the point that you could argue that Denmark is a small country. In the last 1,000 years of history, it's had periods of two empires. Canute took over England and much of Europe, and then later, of course, Sweden, Norway, Faroes, Iceland, Greenland were all part of the Danish Empire, if you like. But after these disastrous wars, Denmark settled down to a much more socially cohesive method of existence. Is there something about Denmark's past that says our small country should play a more cooperative role within the European framework?
Well, the luck for Denmark, I think, was that all who wasn't quite Danish was cut off in all those wars. So you got back the cause of the Danish tradition and the Danish culture. And already you can see in the 14th centuries when the English ambassador in Denmark, he said it was a people who was always happy, or not very good looking, but it was a very calm people who never made any fuss over anything. They took it as it came, and they accepted a king who decided everything, so they took it very calmly.
So you're telling me that in the Middle Ages, the English ambassador here in Copenhagen was saying exactly what the opinion polls are saying now, that Denmark is one of the most contented societies on earth.
Yeah, and he also said we got some of the baddest beer in Europe.
Even in the Middle Ages?
Yes.
So traditions die hard. And so if you were to say to people internationally, how would you like Denmark to be seen and regarded? How would you sum up modern Denmark in a phrase or two?
A peaceful people who like to take care of each other and who like to be friendly to foreigners. That would be the idea, my ideal picture of Denmark in the outside world.
Alan, thank you so much for being on the Alex Salmond Show.
Wonderful, wonderful Copenhagen, which is a city full of surprises. For here at the quayside, in the lee of the Oslo ferry, it's not the flag of the European Union that's flying or the Danish flag. It's the flag of the United Nations. For this is UN City, which employs some 2,000 people, 11 United Nations agencies in the Danish capital. Let's find out what they're doing. I'm now in the heart of UN City, and I'm going to ascend this marvellous staircase to speak to Flemming Johansen, the Deputy Director of Communications, who's going to tell me the whys and wherefores of United Nations City. Flemming Johansen, you're Deputy Director of Communications here at UN City. It's an incredible concept. Tell us a bit about the thinking and the origins of this United Nations City.
So the UN has been in Copenhagen since 1957, when the World Health Organization came to Copenhagen. And we've seen several agencies move to Copenhagen over time. So when the idea for this building was first conceived, which was back in 2002, we had 6 UN agencies in Copenhagen, but 6 agencies working from 3 different addresses. So you had WHO in one spot, one location with the regional headquarters for Europe. You had a UNICEF warehouse on this plot of land, and then you had the UN house with an additional 4 UN agencies. And it goes without saying that that's not very cost efficient. So there are a lot of savings that we could reap if we were to bring everybody under one roof.
Because it's more than just a concept of a convenient property. There's an ethos behind this sharing as well, isn't there?
Well, there is. Back in 2005, there was a process of reform within the UN where a concept was developed. You know that the UN is one big organization with many specialized agencies, funds, programs. So many different subsets all working with their own individual mandates. So what we wanted to try to achieve was to have the notion of one UN, delivering as one. So the Danish government figured, why don't we try to deliver a building that actually allows the UN and the agencies working here to come together to work across agency device, really create the optimum space for agencies to cooperate.
Since the opening in 2013, how have the number of agencies, and indeed the number of UN staff working, how's that grown?
Well, we were 715 when we started, and today we are almost 1,900 people working from out of Copenhagen. So we've exceeded even the wildest of estimates. We've gone beyond. I think that the maximum number was 1,350 people when we did an estimate back in 2005. So we didn't really foresee that we could attract this many people and agencies to Copenhagen.
So the UN staff working here for the various agencies, because they'll all be intermingling with each other with this very original design of building, which basically almost forces people to meet each other.
Exactly, and the architects, they believe that you can change behavior through architecture. So what they wanted to do with the staircase was to put in a feature that kind of animates people to use the staircase. So if you're on the 5th floor, you don't use the lift to go to the 5th floor, you would use the staircase, and you would run into people that you haven't met before, you would run into colleagues that you were in a meeting with yesterday perhaps, and you could follow up on things you failed to conclude on, or you could just simply say, hello, how are you doing? What do you do? And where are you from? So it's a connecting factor in physical terms, but also a connecting space and a meeting place for colleagues to come together. So that's the original idea on the part of the architect. We do have lifts, I should say, but they've actually been purposely withdrawn from out of sight. So when you walk into the building, all you see is this magnificent staircase.
There's some very fit United Nations staff here in Copenhagen.
Well, you should think so. I know, and I want to be frank, I know that many colleagues, they put upon themselves to use the stairs at least once or twice a day. So typically going to and from lunch, they'll take the staircase. Then you have the really fanatic ones who insist on taking the stairs wherever they go. Others obviously use the lift. But it is, I mean, it's quite a walk going up and down, so it will burn some calories for you.
So 11 agencies already, best part of 2,000 of people already and growing. I mean, Denmark's a relatively small country, 5.5 million people. What are the advantages of Denmark, of Copenhagen, that gives it such an international reach through the working of these agencies here in Denmark's capital?
Well, I can guess. It'd be a qualified guess because we do have studies that show that we do have qualified labor force in Copenhagen. Connectivity is rather good. You can get to and from the airport from here within 45 minutes. International surveys have it that living is good in Copenhagen. Copenhagen is by many standards a very livable city. It's an attractive place to work. Time zone-wise, you can cover the entire world from out of Copenhagen, as you can from many European cities. But we do have agencies, UNOPS, the United Nations Office for Project Services, they cover the entire globe. So they will cover the Asia-Pacific region in the morning and the Americas in the afternoon. So for those reasons alone, it's an attractive place to work.
And world organisations, if the country can offer the scope of personnel and communications, there is an attraction in being in small countries. I mean, one thinks of Geneva, which has the headquarters of so many international organisations. I suppose Copenhagen can offer that aspect as well.
Yeah, we are a small country. There's no denying that. But I think a lot of the things that factor in is the availability of space. Obviously, we have a building that still has available space, and that's really part of the problem in some of the other UN cities, UN hubs, if you will. Geneva is a big city, has facilities, but it's running out of space as well. So some agencies have relocated staff to other cities, Copenhagen being just one of them.
When we're coming through into UN City this morning, we're behind a large party of Danish school children. I suppose having these agencies, United Nations agencies here in UN City, it opens up a new perspective for the young people of Denmark, people coming to visit here and seeing within their own capital city international organisations hard at work trying to better the lives of people across the planet.
Well, yeah, indeed. This is like a micro version of the world. We have 108 different nationalities working here in this building alone. We work within the framework that is the Sustainable Development Goals. And when we bring in the school children, obviously we're trying to teach them about the world that is going to be theirs tomorrow. So they, if anyone, need to know exactly what are the challenges, what are the solutions, and what is the agenda, the 2030 agenda that we're working on. So we pride ourselves on talking to as many as we can, invite as many people into the building. We get 100,000 plus visitors every year for meetings, guided tours, conferences. So the UN is the people. So when we put up this building, we wanted to have a building that kind of signals openness and invites the public to come in, because it is indeed their building and we want them to use it as well. Come in, learn about what we do as individual agencies, but even more so what we do together to achieve goals and address challenges that indeed concern us all, be it in Denmark or beyond.
Fleming, you mentioned 108 nationalities working in UN City. What's the gender makeup? I see UN Women are one of the agencies headquartered here.
Yeah, we according to our latest count, we actually have a gender balance in favor of women. So we are 57% women and 43% men, as is.
Fleming Hansen, I'm going to experience this wonderful staircase going downwards, of course. Thank you so much for being on the Alex Salmond Show. Thank you.
Thank you.
So what did we find out from our Danish lesson today? Well, it seems a country can be independent-minded, almost Eurosceptic in its attitudes, and still want to be at the very heart of Europe. Independent-minded, but still claiming its place as part of the European firmament. Perhaps there's a lesson here for Britain's Brexiteers. It is possible, as Denmark shows, to lose an empire and find a role. Or perhaps there's something that other small countries hereabouts could take note of in that Danish lesson. From Tasmina and myself and all here at the show, it's goodbye for now.